Whether at home or work, life is about relationships. Welcome to Small Change, Big Dividends with your host, Branch Isole. Small Change, Big Dividends shares steps, tools, and tips for personal career and spiritual growth. So please welcome the host of Small Change, Big Dividends, Branch Isole.
Throughout our lives, we become what we embrace. We're born into a physical world, so naturally the world influences all we know, all we experience, and all we might dream to be. At some point on our life's journey, we start to think or believe there may be more to know and more to see behind the veil that the world uses to keep truth blurred from our consciousness and our mind's eye vision. Call it religion, call it philosophy, call it karma, spirituality, mysticism. Call it by any number of different names or labels, and it's the revelation that allows us to move forward with a new awareness that we can now discover and use the key to eliminate or reduce the stress, struggle, pressure, and conflict we experience every day in our lives and in our relationships. It's the moment we understand there exists a duality in life. That is, there's a physical us and there's a spiritual us. A duality of being, a duality of presence, and a duality within our very existence. Coming to you from deep in the forest, near the banks of the Ouachita River, you're watching and listening to Small Changes, Big Dividends on the Bold Brave Media TV and Talk Global Network. I'm your host, Branch Isole, and you are my featured guest. Small Changes, Big Dividends is a show where your questions are part of the program. So if you have a question, you can call during our live show to 1-866-451-1451, or you can email your question anytime during the week to my website, branchisole.com. Thanks for joining me today. On Small Changes, Big Dividends, we talk about personal, career, and spiritual Christianity essentials for growth-filled living. Each week, I share mana'o with listeners from around the world. Today, I'm going to share some small changes that can pay big dividends in your relationships and in your life. Because life is about relationships, but it's healthy relationships that encourage and embrace growth. With maturity, we begin to understand there's an element of balance that's missing. That balance is between our physical and our spiritualness of who we are and who may we be willing to become. But even with age and experience, why is this separation not more evident? Why does it take so long for us to wonder or to ask about it? Like yin and yang, duality of life is always present, always together, and yet always separate. We sense links between truth's power and what we don't know, but more importantly, why we don't know it. And we don't know what to do with it. So once we realize that it exists, many people start to think or believe there is, or at least there is a possibility that life is more than bodies and brains. You see, to this end, John chapter 4, verse 24 gives us insight that God is spirit. Scripture declares that God, as creator of the universe, is spirit, and that his character and nature are grounded in truth and love. As part of his creation, we also are spirit in our essence of originality. You see, science has acknowledged that each of us is an electrically charged unit of energy as part of the cosmology makeup of the universe. Now, for our discussions, I label this electrical charged unit as our soul. And our soul houses our individual spiritual essence of origination. You see, in God's creativeness, He has determined that each of us is to be born as a combination of mind, body, soul, and spirit. A body with an analytical brain and mind, a conscience, and subconscious awareness, as well as a psyche filled with emotions, feelings, and perceptions. Each of us has an inner capacity to understand right and wrong. Why? Because right and wrong are the foundational tenets of humanity's traditions within every society. How does this happen? Because our spirit is of and from God. As children, we learn about right and wrong. Because right and wrong is what every society operates on in its rules and regulations. And these are constantly and consistently reinforced by the actions of reward or punishment. Also, as children, we each have a relationship with God. But how do we know this? Everyone at some time asks God something. And by this acknowledgement in our conscious mind, a belief in God's existence is established. It's this first awareness of God that beckons to our spirit of originality to be reconnected back to God as creator. And about age 2, we start to understand the implications of right and wrong. These are expressed through a single word, and that word is no. Because no is then quickly reinforced as we grow. And we learn the consequences of right and wrong as reward and punishment. And as we grow, we start to connect the dots between right and wrong, the concept, and reward and punishment, the actions. You see, we start every choice, every decision with the question, what's in it for me? A reward or a punishment? This limited understanding reduces our spiritual essence to an inactive state, meaning our inactive spirit is there, but it only responds to right or wrong, reward or punishment situations. And the further on life's path we travel with an inactive spirit, the more we approach every interaction, every choice, every decision thinking, my life is all about me. So every decision is about rewards or punishments and failures. Let me ask you this. Have you ever made a decision where the outcome left you embarrassed? If you've ever experienced shame, guilt, remorse, or regret, and we all have, these are emotions we have when our spirit is inactive. Now, why is this? Because the inactive spirit only responds to right and wrong, reward or punishment choices. These emotions reveal to us that we could have responded differently in a situation that we may now be questioning or regretting. Maybe you've seen this depicted as an animated little angel on one shoulder and a little devil on the other, both vying for your attention. You see, whenever we grapple with how to respond in a particular situation, the angel is our inactive spirit, reminding us of right and wrong, reward and punishment. The little devil represents our carnal or worldly desires, tempting us to convince and be convinced of the pleasures and rewards of the world's ways. Remember, we are all prodigal children. We're all little Pinocchios, desiring to make our mark as we venture out into the world, pursuing its glitz and glamour with our limited, operating, inactive spirit. You see, most people operate under pressure, stress, and struggle in their daily life, and seldom use their limited 10% spiritual awareness against the intentions and actions of their 90% self-focused desires. These desires are rooted deeply in the pursuit of the world's success, the world's possessions, and the world's ways. And each of these worldly pursuits veiled by self-perception of how we appear in the eyes of others. So in all of this, what's missing? What's missing is the activation of our inactive spirit. This is the missing link, a fully activated spiritual presence. You see, the job of our inactive spirit is to remind us of the negative consequences hidden behind the veil of right and wrong choices and decisions. The new introduction and presence of the missing link is the spark that reactivates an inactive spirit, the one you brought with you at birth. And by kickstarting spiritual reactivation, we now have the power to replace old pattern behaviors and old pattern responses. With a now fully activated spirit, we start to recognize truth everywhere in our life, and we see truth on display as never before. How does this happen? Well, we are still in the world, but we are no longer of the world. You see, those of the world continue to see only the world's ways. Those in the world, but not of the world, now see the entirety of the world and its ways. And more importantly, we start to recognize that there is an alternative path available, one that can give victory over the world's attempts to crush us from within. We're going to pause for our first commercial break. And when we return, we're going to look deeper at this balance between the physical us and the spiritual us. You're watching and listening to Small Changes, Big Dividends on the Bold Brave Media TV and Talk Global Network. I'm your host, Branch Isole, and I'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching and listening to Small Changes, Big Dividends. I'm your host, Branch Isole. Today, we're discussing activation of a balance between your physical and your spiritual you. Interestingly, eventually everyone hears about spirituality in some form or fashion. And even so, many remain tied and bound to and by the world's ways. Those willing to recognize truth now see behind the veil, and in doing so, they automatically recognize truth's antithesis, the lies, fabrications, falsehoods, deceit, and deceptions. But how does this happen? Well, truth shows them to be exactly what they are. And with a 100% activated spirit, the power of God's spiritual strength is now within us, revealing the moral and ethical responses in every pending choice. We now clearly view the moral and ethical dilemmas in each of our decisions. So the focus of the question is no longer, what's in it for me? Refocus, the question is now, how will this choice affect those I care about? My family, my neighborhood, my coworkers, my community, and my world. Now, please note, I didn't say the world, I said my world. How will my decisions affect those in my world, those that I care about, and those I choose to be responsible for? You see, with a 100% reactivated spirit, we now recognize opportunities for moral and ethical responses. Again, our missing link. By recognizing truth, we come to identify new possible outcomes in every choice, meaning both the benefits and the adversities. You see, in knowing truth, we now automatically know the consequences of the lies, falsehoods, and fabrications ahead of time. That's the key. Not only for us as individuals, but just as importantly for those we care about. Our responses now come from a place of moral and ethical understanding. But how do we know what the moral and ethical responses are? If we choose to respond this way, that is, morally and ethically, to situations, problems, opportunities, and relationships, what will these new responses actually look like in action? Well, again, we go to the source. God's character and nature are truth and love. His character and nature in action are morals and ethics. And with a 100% reactivated spirit, we can now choose to live by responding morally and ethically, both at home and at work, to the people, circumstances, events, and situations in our daily life. We can now automatically start to live, share, and reveal our new relationship with God simply by responding morally and ethically. The question becomes why? It's simple, because it's no longer about me, it's now about the moral and ethical me. So how do we know what those moral and ethical responses should be or what they look like? Well, when our spirit has been activated by the Holy Spirit of Christ, we immediately become aware of the morals and ethics in every situation. Why? Well, because now we have the Spirit of truth living in our soul with our original spiritual essence. And we now see all the options and consequences ahead in every situation. Not just the right or wrong choice with its rewards or punishments. We now recognize the larger and longer term ramifications in each choice that we face. People often ask me how they'll know what a moral or ethical response is. Again, simply, with 100% reactivated spirit, the truth guides us as our options, choices, and decisions reveal the moral or ethics in every situation. So now you're probably asking how? How will I know the moral and ethical path? Well, first, you'll recall previous old pattern responses, the ones that produced negative fallout, chaos, calamity, or disappointment and despair. And second, your now 100% reactivated spirit works for you by sharing with your mind and conscience the actions of morals and ethics. Let me give you a clear-cut example, actually one that you already know. Everyone alive knows what loving behavior looks like. And likewise, everyone alive knows what unloving behavior looks like. Because the Spirit of God lives within you from birth, each of us came into the world knowing how to recognize appropriate or loving behavior. and when we know and recognize what unloving abuse or inappropriate responses look like as well. It's in this same manner, this same innate way, with God's Spirit, you will no longer experience disappointing or unpleasant post-event emotions. These are emotions we all know well: guilt, shame, embarrassment, remorse, and regret. The ones that were most dominant in our past as the aftermath of bad or inappropriate decisions. The question again becomes why? Because past consequences were rooted in what's in it for me, a reward or a punishment. And now, with spiritual activation, every possible outcome is previewed for you. The only question is, will you continue to respond as the old you, or will you now start to respond as the new you? That is, the one who responds morally and ethically. We're going to pause for our next break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about this week's prophecy segment. You're watching and listening to Small Changes, Big Dividends on the Bold Brave Media TV and Talk Global Network. I'm your host, Branch Isole, and I'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching and listening to Small Changes, Big Dividends. I'm your host, Branch Isole. On this week's prophecy segment, we're talking about the 70th week of Israel's suffering. This describes the activities in this coming last week, and it's a last week that will affect every person alive when it takes place. In a previous prophecy segment, we talked about how important religion is in the lives of the Jews in Israel, and likewise the importance of their temple to their culture, religion, history, and lifestyles, and the importance of them as a people and a nation. It's this paramount physical connection to God through the Jewish religion that's all important in the last days. But the coming third temple is also important as a designation to the world of the last days and their arrival. You see, there have been two temples in Jerusalem previously. The first was built by King Solomon, and approximately around 957 BCE, which means 1,000 years prior to the birth of Christ. This temple, the first temple, was destroyed by the Babylonian invasion in about 600 BCE. The Edict of Cyrus in 539 BCE allowed the Jews to return to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple. This would be known as the Second Temple. This Second Temple was destroyed by the Roman invasion between the years 70 and 74 CE, Common Era, or after Christ. In the book of Daniel, chapter 9, verses 24 through 27, Israel is warned about this 70th week, when the temple will be in the hands of the Antichrist. You see, each week in Scripture, in this Revelation, in the book of Revelation and the book of Daniel, is described as a set or a group of 7 years. So, 7 weeks would be 7 times 7, or 49 years. Daniel's prophecy reads, 70 sevens, or 490 years, are decreed for your people, meaning the Jews, and your holy city, Jerusalem, to finish its transgression, to put an end to sin, to atone for wickedness, to bring everlasting righteousness, meaning through the return of Jesus Christ. Now know and understand this. From the time the word goes out to restore and rebuild Jerusalem by the Edict of Cyrus, we just mentioned, until the Anointed One, Jesus, the ruler, comes through his birth in Nazareth. There will be 7 sevens and 62 sevens, for a total of 69 sevens, leaving 1 week or 1 7-year period yet to be fulfilled as the 70th week of Israel's suffering at the hands of the ruler who will come, that being the Antichrist. So why is this important for us? Why is this important for America? Why is this important for believers? When this final week or 7 years occurs, America will cease to be a factor on the world stage. You see, with less than a year to go until the 2024 election cycle, we are about to witness a benchmark moment, not only in American history, but pivotal to the end times that we are now living in. And this is all foretold in Bible scripture as the last days. This week, we started talking about duality between the physical and the spiritual realms. Well, there's also a duality between Christ and the Antichrist, between God and Satan, and between John the Baptist and the coming false prophet. You see, John the Baptist was God's appointed forerunner announcing the coming of Jesus Christ 2,000 years ago. And in the same manner, Satan today has his own herald, announcing and preparing the world for the arrival and ascension to power of Satan's, anointed one, who is destined for world domination. This current herald is under the tutelage, guidance, protection, and direct intervention of the prince of this world, meaning Satan. And preparing the way for the Antichrist is one who fulfills the Isaiah 5:20 prophecy that we spoke of last week. This herald is identified by his character, which is always on full display and in public view through his own words and deeds. So when the Ezekiel war starts, and remember the Ezekiel war is the third prophecy that God has said he will show the entire world, that the entire world will be witness to. When the Ezekiel war starts, no country will come to Israel's aid or assistance, and Israel will stand alone. Now, you can see this starting to happen every day in our news cycles as the world continues to align itself against Israel in the current Gaza Israel-Hamas conflict. And when the Ezekiel war in its imminency arrives on the world stage, no country will commit military assistance to Israel. They will literally be on their own. This absence of assistance includes the United States. So we have to ask why. We have been a staunch Israel for the last 75 years. Why is it when the Ezekiel war is threatened, we abandon Israel along with the rest of the world? Well, here's a simple fact. The U.S. military will be busy domestically, attempting to quell domestic turmoil and stop the seeds of civil war. You see, America's isolationist domestic agenda will be all self-consuming, with internal struggles and inept leadership as America enters its darkest days and moves swiftly to a neo-authoritarian, quasi-fascist, and surveillance police state. Remember, Mystery Babylon becomes irrelevant and is no longer a player in the final years. The Bible tells us her time of living in luxury and exporting poison to the rest of the world is finished. In Revelation 18, verses 1 through 8, we know that God warns all believers still alive in Mystery Babylon to come out of her. Let's stop for a moment and review the 5 prophetic end-time events God promises that the whole world will witness in the 70th week. The first is the Ezekiel War Treaty signed and ratified that ends the Ezekiel War. The second will be the rebuilding of the third Jewish temple in Jerusalem. The third will be the rapture. The fourth will be the invasion of Israel and the invasion of Jerusalem specifically by the army of the Antichrist. And the fifth will be the sores and the plague of sores that follows the rapture on the followers of the Antichrist, which last for 5 months. All 3 of these traumatic events will be witnessed by everyone on the planet. Because remember, the purpose of prophecy is twofold. First, to scare the living hell out of those brave enough to pay attention. And second, to reveal the escape route, the rapture. If today's episode frightens you, good, but that's not its intent. This interpretation of prophecy is to share a prophetic truth. If you think the terrible suffering, death, and destruction you are viewing daily in your news cycle from incidents across the globe are disturbing now, just wait. Jesus himself states in Matthew 24, verse 21, the last days will be a time when there will be such distress unlike the world has ever seen. The fallout from war, famine, storms, fires, disease, violence, and personal hatred will be nothing like the world has ever experienced. This is the power of prophecy, to warn and prepare, so that you and your family will not suffer, as so many across the world already do, and certainly will under the reign of the Antichrist. The global conflagration ahead cannot and will not be avoided, but you and your family can be prepared and saved from the hellish conditions ahead. As we finish our look at Israel's 70th week, let's turn to Daniel 9, where Daniel records the following. While I was speaking and praying, confessing my sin and the sin of my people Israel, and making my requests to the Lord my God for his holy hill. This is the hill upon which the temple sits. While I was still in prayer, Gabriel, the man I had seen in an earlier vision, came to me in swift flight at about the time of the evening sacrifice. Now, Gabriel, he's referring to as the archangel. He instructed me and said to me, Daniel, I have now come to give you insight and understanding. As soon as you began to pray, a word went out, which I have come to tell you, for you are highly esteemed. Therefore, consider the word and understand the vision. Now remember, this word and vision are for us as well. 77s are decreed for your people Israel and your holy city Jerusalem to finish transgression, to put an end to sin, to atone for wickedness, and to bring everlasting righteousness, to seal up the vision prophecy, and to anoint the most holy place. The people of the ruler, that is the Antichrist's followers, who will come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. meaning both Jerusalem and the temple will be destroyed. The end will come like a flood, war will continue to the end, and desolations have been decreed. He goes on to say, he, meaning the Antichrist, will confirm a covenant with many nations for 1/7, or the last 7 years. In the middle of the 7, or at the midpoint or mid-tribulation, he, the Antichrist, will put an end to the sacrifice and offering, meaning he'll be abolishing the Jewish temple worship in the third temple. And at the temple he will set up, meaning he, the Antichrist, will have the false prophet set up an abomination that causes desolation. And this desolation will continue until the decree is poured out on him, meaning the end of the 70th week, or the end of the 7 years of tribulation. It's this false prophet who will have erected a living statue of the Antichrist in the third temple to be worshipped worldwide. For this final 3.5 years, the Antichrist will rule the world on behalf of Satan as he gathers worshipers and followers who will be part of his eternal kingdom. That's it for this week. Join me next week when we look at life's hierarchy of lessons and Jesus Christ's coming millennial kingdom at the end of the 7 years of tribulation. We'll take our final break, and when we return, we'll talk a little bit about next week. You're watching and listening to Small Changes, Big Dividends on the Bold Brave Media TV and Talk Global Network. I'm your host, Branch Isole. I'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching and listening to Small Changes, Big Dividends. I'm your host, Branch Isole. Thank you for joining me again today. On Small Changes, Big Dividends, we discuss personal, career, and spiritual Christianity essentials for growth-filled living. If you know someone who could benefit from today's episode, please share it with them. If today's show has been helpful for you, please give us a rating and review. And to know more about my work, I invite you to visit my website, branchisole.com, or my YouTube channel, Branch Isole. Today's show has been sponsored by Crystal Creek Farm. If you have a business, a product, or a service you'd like to share with the world on Small Changes, Big Dividends, just send your inquiry to the website. You've been watching and listening to Small Changes, Big Dividends on the Bold Brave Media TV and Talk Global Network. Until next week, be in the world, not of the world.
This has been Small Change, Big Dividends. When you're ready for healthier, more successful relationships at home or work, Small Change, Big Dividends is your show. Wednesdays, 4 p.m. Eastern on the Bold Brave TV network.